preceded by a presentation, a keynote from one of the panelists, from Mr. Andrei Augusto Passos Rodrigues, Secretary for the Security of Major Events of the State of Brazil, which will address you with a presentation on the Brazilian experience in relation to the major events that Brazil has been hosting in these years, not just the Football World Cup, but very soon the Olympics and other major events that the country has been preparing as major events for the country, but as events with a very important and strong relevance for the whole region and international community. Before starting, allow me also to briefly introduce the chairperson of this panel, my very good friend Gregory Buzak, and then we'll lead the discussion. Gregory Buzak is, I consider him as one of the, let's say, real gurus on security at the global level, and for sure here in the US. One of the, I would say, of the founders and the pioneers in the field of multi-sectoral cooperation and public-private partnerships, has been basically one of the key persons and pioneers of the, I would say, of the biggest public-private partnership in the world, that is the OSAC, which is the oldest platform involving government and the business community in the security domain. But before proceeding with the panel, let me give the floor to our colleague from Brazil, Andrei, for, I know he has prepared a presentation, and then of course he will be also integrated in the panel to continue the discussion. Obrigado, Andrei. Que seja bem-vindo.
Bom dia a todos. É uma especial satisfação participar deste evento, e eu inicialmente quero aqui cumprimentar a ICSS, a OEA, pela iniciativa e pela oportunidade de que nós possamos aqui ter um foro para discutir, para aprender e para trocar experiência entre tantas importantes nações que aqui estão representadas. Eu pensava a respeito do tema segurança de grandes eventos, desenvolvimento social, e vejo que são temas indissociáveis. Não há como se pensar em segurança sem desenvolvimento, desenvolvimento sem segurança, e isso tudo deixando um importante legado para os países onde se desenvolvem grandes eventos. O Brasil teve a oportunidade única de receber uma sequência de importantes eventos em curto espaço de tempo. Tivemos a Jornada Mundial da Juventude, com mais de 2 milhões de pessoas nas areias de Copacabana. Tivemos a Copa das Confederações, a Copa do Mundo FIFA, e agora estamos nos preparando para, no ano que vem, os Jogos Olímpicos e os Jogos Paralímpicos em agosto e em setembro. Isso para não falarmos ainda dos Jogos Pan-Americanos de 2017, a Conferência do Meio Ambiente Rio+20, também os Jogos Mundiais Militares que aconteceram nesse período, e agora, ainda como uma preparação para os Jogos, a primeira edição dos Jogos Mundiais Indígenas, que acontecerão também na cidade de Palmas, no estado do Tocantins, no nosso país. Mas essa sequência de eventos nos trouxe oportunidades de aprendizado, experiência, oportunidade de desenvolver um trabalho, uma metodologia a partir das melhores práticas do mundo inteiro. E esse foro, e aqui reitero os cumprimentos, esse foro tem muito essa iniciativa de congregar várias instituições, vários parceiros, para que a gente possa unificar os conceitos, para que a gente possa ter padrões de excelência em todos os eventos ao redor do mundo. No Brasil, são 27 unidades da federação, cada estado tem a polícia judiciária, tem a polícia ostensiva, existe a polícia federal, da qual eu pertenço, eu sou o comissário da Polícia Federal, e que tem atuação nesses grandes eventos, além de outras instituições de trânsito, de saúde, bombeiros, transporte, mobilidade, comunicação, energia, enfim, uma extensa gama de agências que participam dos grandes eventos. O governo brasileiro, então, entendeu por oportuno criar uma unidade, uma secretaria que faça todo o planejamento, que faça a coordenação, que promova finalmente a integração entre todas as instituições que têm atuação em grandes eventos. E esta é a secretaria que hoje tenho a responsabilidade de conduzir, com o papel de planejar, de coordenar e de implementar todas as ações de segurança para grandes eventos no Brasil. E isso nos impõe uma sequência de desafios. Esses desafios são comuns a todos os países que vão planejar ações de segurança, e aqui me restringo à segurança pública em grandes eventos, onde temos de ter uma legislação que dê o suporte à ação, temos de ter uma infraestrutura para operar, e daí a importância, e aqui passamos mais uma vez pelo tema do legado, do desenvolvimento que isso traz embutido à realização de um grande evento, para que tenhamos um plano realizado conjuntamente, uma operação integrada, e ao final de tudo isso, deixemos para o país, deixemos para as cidades, para os cidadãos, um grande legado de melhorias na segurança pública, de investimentos, de profissionais melhor preparados. O Brasil adotou como regra, como política, fazer investimentos, e investimos 500 milhões de dólares para Copa do Mundo e Olimpíadas em segurança pública, com um requisito fundamental: todo investimento tem de ser útil, tem de ser proveitoso, não só para a segurança daquele evento, mas que fique ao país como um legado em segurança pública. Esse é um aprendizado importante e que hoje, felizmente, nós conseguimos acompanhar e identificar no Brasil. Tenho pouco tempo, passarei muito rapidamente, só para dizer que a legislação foi toda estabelecida a partir da nossa Constituição Federal, as leis penais, a criação da secretaria, que está, isso é um outro detalhe importante, é uma unidade que está vinculada, existe a Presidente da República, o Ministro da Justiça, e eu respondo diretamente ao Ministro da Justiça. Ou seja, existe uma cadeia hierárquica curta que permite uma tomada de decisões muito célere, muito rápida, facilitando todo o nosso trabalho. E aqui quero apresentar rapidamente o que fizemos para a Copa do Mundo, que estamos preparando para os Jogos Olímpicos e Paralímpicos, de maneira bastante objetiva. Em termos de infraestrutura, o Brasil tem 200 milhões de habitantes, tem 8 mil quilômetros de litoral, mais 16 mil quilômetros de fronteira seca com 10 países, e o que nos impõe um desafio imenso, né, de fazer um plano unificado para a operação em todo o Brasil. Criamos comissões regionais nas 12 sedes da Copa do Mundo, envolvendo mais de 5 mil profissionais de segurança pública que trabalharam incansavelmente, definindo todas as ações integradas que podemos participar. E ontem vi aqui o secretário Alan falando de 4 fases importantes nesse trabalho de planejamento de segurança para grandes eventos. O cheque de pessoas, o controle da operação de acesso, da estabilidade dos jogos, e depois a avaliação e a retenção do conhecimento, que hoje é uma prática que nós adotamos. Quando falamos de Jogos Olímpicos e Paralímpicos, estamos falando de outro patamar. Jogos Olímpicos, e ontem o representante do comitê aqui passou alguns números, os Jogos Olímpicos envolvem 205 países, 10.500 atletas, mais de 30 mil jornalistas, 70 mil voluntários participam do evento, são 7 milhões de ingressos que estão sendo comercializados, e a expectativa é de um número infinitamente superior ao número dos jogos da Copa do Mundo da FIFA que nós tenhamos no Brasil para esse período. Chefes de Estado serão, a expectativa é que serão 80 chefes de Estado participando da cerimônia de abertura. E isso nos impõe um desafio ainda maior em tudo aquilo que estamos planejando. Para que se tenha uma ideia, são diariamente, saem da Vila Olímpica para as regiões de treino e de competição, 1.500 veículos, ônibus, levando e trazendo atletas diariamente para os Jogos. E isso realmente é um trabalho que estamos planejando com a comissão no Rio de Janeiro, reunindo mais de 50 instituições, não só de segurança pública, mas de todas as áreas que têm contato com a segurança pública. Eu tenho a responsabilidade de presidir esta comissão, onde ali nós definimos todo o plano, toda a ação que vamos fazer a partir de agora de agosto. Começamos com os testes, são mais de 40 testes que vamos fazer até os Jogos, para que tenhamos então oportunidade de, no momento da realização da competição, estarmos absolutamente preparados para esse imenso desafio. Investimos muito em tecnologia. Aqui vocês têm algumas imagens do Centro de Comando e Controle Nacional, onde tivemos a honra de receber, e esta foto ilustra, a Presidente da República, 17 ministros de Estado, ali o Ministro da Justiça está falando, fazendo o debriefing, a avaliação final da Copa no nosso Centro de Segurança Pública, mostrando que realmente houve um trabalho muito difícil para se chegar nesse momento. Centros de comando regionais, a foto à direita é do centro de Porto Alegre, uma das sedes da Copa do Mundo, e também do Maracanã, que ali vocês acompanham, junto ao veículo, que é um centro de comando e controle móvel, que nós alocamos conforme o interesse da operação. Ainda na área de tecnologia, utilizamos o sistema de imageamento aéreo com transmissão em tempo real para todos os centros de controle, e isso nos permite um absoluto controle da operação. E tudo que está aí é um legado que está, e aqui entramos novamente na questão do legado, do desenvolvimento, que fica para a segurança pública cotidiana no trabalho. Nós temos uma operação integrada, e aqui quero ressaltar a importância desse foro para a troca de experiências, onde fizemos na Copa a cooperação, não só no momento da operação, mas fizemos previamente, e aqui preciso fazer um registro e um agradecimento especial ao meu querido amigo Dario Ruiz, que foi incansável em promover, em permitir que nós tivéssemos uma efetiva colaboração com a Argentina, não só na preparação do evento, com o encaminhamento de listas com dados de interesse da operação, mas também durante a operação, onde nós fizemos uma parceria muito intensa com policiais de todos os países, mas da Argentina, que fizeram operações, detivemos Barra Brava lá no Brasil, graças a esse apoio e a essa colaboração que foi possível e viabilizada muito principalmente pelo papel do Dario nesse cenário. Nós criamos o Centro de Cooperação Policial Internacional, e aqui já encaminho o encerramento, Centro de Cooperação Policial Internacional, que vamos repetir esse modelo para os Jogos Olímpicos, recebendo policiais de alguns países. Na Copa recebemos de todos os países que competiram, não temos como receber mais de 200 países, mas receberemos policiais de muitos países que competirão no Brasil, junto com a figura dos spotters, que são policiais que circulam junto aos ambientes de competição. Eu trabalho com as embaixadas, consulados, com as adjudâncias da Polícia Federal no exterior, a Meripol, Interpol, e aqui uma novidade que estaremos implementando agora para os Jogos Rio 2016, que é uma unidade de cooperação internacional com foco antiterrorista. Vinha agora deslocando para cá, recebi a notícia de situações ainda não confirmadas na França, na Tunísia, que apontam um ataque, não se sabe se com relação entre eles, mas ataques terroristas, infelizmente, ocorridos agora pela manhã. Então é um foco importante de atenção, e vamos inovar para os Jogos com esse Centro de Cooperação Internacional para a prevenção ao terrorismo. Alguns números só da Copa do Mundo, onde Máximo falava ontem da cooperação. Tivemos mais de 1 milhão de turistas estrangeiros no Brasil, de 200 países. A expectativa é que nas Olimpíadas teremos mais de 2 milhões. Pesquisas apontaram que 95% desses turistas desejam retornar ao Brasil, e isso trará seguramente o desenvolvimento e o legado que o evento deixa. além de todos os outros números que vocês podem aí ver, mais de 100 mil policiais, profissionais de segurança pública que empregamos. Realmente são dados que impressionam as quantidades, né? FanFest com mais de 5 milhões de pessoas, e felizmente nós não tivemos nenhum incidente de gravidade, em que pese campanhas pela imprensa internacional e imprensa nacional com previsões catastróficas, que seria a Copa da Morte, e depois se retrataram dizendo que não foi nada disso, que a Copa foi um sucesso. Reportagens no Brasil dizendo que a Copa do Mundo só seria possível realizar em 2038, para depois a mesma editora dizer que foi a grande Copa, e ao final a imprensa internacional também apoiando todo o trabalho. Aqui finalizo com as considerações de que a importância da criação, detalhes que foram fundamentais para esse processo, e também o êxito que tivemos e esperamos ter nas Olimpíadas. A criação de uma unidade específica, com poder de decisão para resolver as questões, planejar e coordenar as ações de segurança, a colaboração tanto interna quanto internacional, o investimento em segurança, em preparação e capacitação dos profissionais, e com isso o grande legado de desenvolvimento que fica para o Brasil, da expansão desse modelo para o dia a dia, de todas as cidades, capitais com centros de comando e controle, que deixam um legado material importante e aquele fundamental, que é o legado imaterial das pessoas trabalharem conjuntas, articuladas, seja no âmbito interno quanto na cooperação internacional. Agradeço a todos, muito obrigado.
Thank you very much for the presentation. You clearly have a very challenging time before you as you get ready to host the Olympic Games. It's enlightening to hear some of the things that you've said. As Massimiliano said, I'm Greg Bujak. I know many of you in the room. I've been around the world of sport from the time I was a young boy, because I loved to play basketball, baseball, football, like most everyone else here. I also was around the Olympic Games in Atlanta in 1996. At the time, I was the director of the Diplomatic Security Service, and we deployed about 225, 250 special agents who were part of a law enforcement team to protect VIPs who were coming in to attend the games, and to assist everyone from the organizing committee, which had its own security apparatus, all of the local police forces, the state police forces, and other federal agencies who were there. It was quite an effort. Anyone that's been to the Olympic Games knows that it takes that kind of cooperation between all of the elements that are responsible for securing the games. I think this panel is fortunate because we get to talk about what is really the mainstay of this conference, and that is the talking about public-private partnerships, the exchange of information, the ability to share the best practices. And I commend the ICSS and the OAS for hosting the conference today. Bringing the stakeholders together, and in particular in the Americas, to look at what's going to face us over the next few years, I think is extremely important. And if we can draw on each other's experiences, we will all be better off. Well, we've got a good panel. I won't go on talking any more about that, but I'd like to introduce our panels as they came up. We've heard already from Andre. I'd like to introduce James Weston. James Weston is the chief of the RISC staff, which stands for the research organization that's a part of the Overseas Security Advisory Council. It's a part of the Department of State within the Bureau of Diplomatic Security. I won't try to steal too much of James's thunder, but the organization started very small with maybe 100 U.S. corporations coming together with the State Department to talk about security information that needed to be shared overseas, outside of the United States. And it's grown now to, we have thousands of constituents, and I think if we think about it, the actual number of organizations is over 3,000 that are a part of it. We've branched out in OSAC from being simply U.S. corporations to also being in touch with faith-based organizations, educational institutions, and certainly non-governmental organizations. We have very close ties with the U.S. Olympic Committee, a non-government organization. James comes to us with a wealth of experience. He's been in government for a good while. He has a Bachelor of Arts degree from Texas Christian University. That also happens to be where my brother went to school, so I'm very proud to have James on the panel with us today. Let me introduce also Bill Raish. Bill comes to us from the Intercept organization at the New York University. Bill was the founder of Intercept, which was designed to be an international center for enterprise preparedness. That was particularly poignant in New York City after the 9/11 disaster. I happened to be working in New York at the time, and it's the first time I met Bill. I'm happy to say that Intercept has been successful. It continues to be a part of a public-private partnership that tries to prepare the private sector in dealing with emergencies. Bill holds a Bachelor of Arts degree and an MBA from Cornell University. We've added another panelist, which we're very pleased to have with us, and that's Rich Cooper. Rich comes to us today from the Chamber of Commerce Foundation. I've known Rich for a number of years. He was I think I met him originally when he worked at the Department of Homeland Security. He's held a number of different positions, all focused on looking at what sort of security issues as well as business issues are facing U.S. businesses. He's specifically the Vice President of Emerging Issues and Research for the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation. It examines all of the matters that impact the United States private sector over the next 2 to 10 years. So with that futuristic look, we're looking forward to hearing a little bit from what he might have seen for that, what he might be seeing for the future. He holds a Bachelor of Arts degree from Mary Washington University and continues his studies at Virginia Tech. And I would welcome all the panelists. Thank you very much for being here with us today. And we'll get started as soon as I get wired up. How are we doing? Sounds good. I think I'll start with my colleague from the State Department since I know him best. James, when we think about all that OSAC's done, it's been a pioneer and that sort of thing. Could you comment for us on the public-private partnerships and how they've contributed to the organization of safe and secure games?
Sure. I think that, well, I'd like to thank you all for the opportunity to be here today, and especially for the kind words about OSAC at the outset of the panel. I'm very fortunate to be here and be the recipient of 30 years of previous hard work. But I think what has made OSAC a success, and particularly in the field of what we call major events, is that being a State Department entity, we're uniquely, and I would say probably perfectly positioned to help the private sector in their operations and particularly to conduct safe and secure events. We're able to leverage the diplomatic presence in the host countries and share the concerns that the private sector has through our diplomatic channels. The department also assigns coordinators for each of these events, including a coordinator just for security. So that is our main channel for communicating all the concerns and the resources that are going to be required in the lead up to these events. And then specifically around OSAC, we convene a number of different platforms leading up to the games, and we operate them during the games. And by platforms, what I mean are on-the-ground partnerships between the government through the embassy and the private sector that's going to be operating during the games. And these platforms, or country councils that we operate in the location, serve as a way for the security managers to network, share information, and to address any concerns that they might have amongst each other. During the games, they continue to be a very successful outlet for us to share information and also to hear the information that the private sector is seeing on the ground, and that becomes some of the most valuable pieces of information that the U.S. government has during the events.
Good stuff. Thank you very much. I might turn to Bill, because in your experience in New York, you obviously had to bring lots of disparate organizations together and try to make them focus. Can you comment, please, on the ability of a group like that coming together to possibly prepare for the next disaster, the next emergency, the next incident?
Sure, and Greg, and again, sincere thanks for the opportunity really to speak to such an august group here. I'd like to reflect on perhaps the last 10 years we've had really in public-private engagement, where also in part we're in the midst right now of developing what is a regional resilience network, public and private sector coming together across the entire metro New York area, but also developing what might be a prototype for a wider public-private engagement in other metropolitan areas. And it has, I think, a lot of relevance, particularly to the challenge of sport, as we've spoken about. Clearly, I think we talked about the title here is multi-sectoral. Well, this is a team sport, and I think that's really what, to a great extent, that Greg teased out here. This is about bringing business, about elements of government, about NGOs, a diversity of players to the equation. If I could use a brief analogy on here, I think we all have been enjoying the great food we've had here. Perhaps there's a number of cooks amongst us. But I think in essence, we need three key elements really when we're looking to create the optimal multi-sectoral approach really to sport and to successful, safe, and secure sports. And those three elements are, one, we need a cook. We need a catalyst. And I would argue in large part, I think the catalyst we have right now is ICSS. I think it's doing some amazing things as a convener. I think arguably over time, I think you will probably see it be a little bit perhaps of a culinary institute. I think there's some training opportunity here really to teach all of us a little bit more about the nuances of bringing together key elements of the community to have successful sport, particularly safe and secure sport. I think you're also looking at essentially the opportunity to play a catalytic role, each of you, in your own countries as you go back. So if you will, you're the cooks in your own kitchens as you return, as you bring together not only yourselves, but also key ingredients, and the other element I'd add to this equation is a recipe. So what are the key ingredients that we've seen both as part of the Metro New York area, but also part of a global risk network that we've had that has collaborated in many nations across the world in that respect? What we've seen in terms of key ingredients in large part is essentially, firstly, the right players at the table. We have much of government here, but at the same time, I think what we've seen to a great extent are key elements of the business community. We'll hear certainly from Rich in a moment, and OSAC is a tremendous effort, successful effort in bringing together elements of the business community. But also there are key elements of NGOs, each of them bringing expertise to the equation about perhaps key risks, whether it's WHO and the like around contagious disease, whether it's Interpol around some other more criminal activity. But key stakeholders also run the gamut to critical infrastructure. I think you have the opportunity to engage critical infrastructure within each of your efforts, whether that's communications, whether that's water, whether that's elements of transportation. The ongoing impact that we heard from our keynoter here, the ability to have a sustained impact, that's when you integrate yourself also with the critical infrastructure of your nation, such that sport is not a standalone activity, it's one very much integrated into the fabric of what you're developing. I would also suggest that there's an opportunity perhaps to really look at universities and research institutions. I think ICSS might be a fascinating entity to bring together a consortium in all of your nations and other nations to look at these wider issues, and perhaps to create something in the way of a global consortium in that respect that might actually bring that sense of expertise to the equation. I think the other element probably is maybe some parallel even with OSAC around a global alliance of business and support of good sport safe and secure sport in particular. The other element I would just bring to the equation here that is an important ingredient is a commonality or at least complementary needs. We need to have much of what we're talking about as of late is the what to do. If there's not a compelling why to do it, if we haven't teased out the important value propositions to bring different stakeholders to the table, you're not going to have ongoing engagement in this area. You're not going to have a sustainable, continuing relationship, and that's vital to the equation. So I think another element, and I know in large part ICSS is beginning to tease some of this out really with looking at the economic impacts. I would suggest that goes well beyond societal impacts, but you need to have individual value propositions for each of the key stakeholders that you want to bring together in whatever multilateral approach to sport that you'd like to see. So the final piece of this, if we've got a cook, we've got key ingredients, particularly around the elements of key stakeholders, we need a recipe. We need at least some level of a plan or discipline. And I think that generally starts with some sort of clear purpose, clear objectives among the players you bring together, some sort of discipline, at least in this case, maybe a governance structure, some elements of robust communication among your stakeholders, and a level of trust. Certainly every endeavor we undertake has challenges. We're going to stub our toes. We're going to make mistakes. Those situations involve trust and require trust to move forward, and ultimately flexibility. There are times when in any cooking process you run out of basil or you run out of another ingredient. Well, you're going to have to shoot from the hip and move forward in that respect. I think ICSS in large part could play a key role in bringing together some of this discipline. A cookbook, if you will, in large part, perhaps, or some prototypes in how these various entities might come together to do that. So with cooking in mind, I wish you bon appetit, or in this case, really perhaps more appropriate, bien appetito.
Great, thank you very much, Bill. I'd like to now reach out to Rich. Rich, given your focus at the Chamber of Commerce Foundation on emerging issues into the future, I wonder if you might be able to tease us a little bit with what you've been looking at and what the Chamber's been looking at as those things that are going to face us in the future that we were going to have to grapple with.
Thank you, Greg, and thank you to the organizers for the opportunity to participate in the program and on this panel. I think one of the things that you will see, and it's not just here within the United States, but you're seeing it around the world, the private sector isn't willing just to be sort of a bystander on what's going on in sport and commerce, et cetera. In fact, very much they're looking to be a driver of a number of those things, and there are a lot of reasons why that happens. Sport and commerce certainly provide identity to community wherever they may be, but I think business understands that there is an opportunity that it is good business to be engaged within that, not just from a sales perspective, but as it relates to developing identity, developing community relationships, et cetera. And so you've seen more and more companies starting to play active roles, and these are not just the companies that own sports teams and own infrastructures, that they want to identify with winners and with the community and have that allegiance. One of the things, though, that leaps out as you look towards the future and what are some of the challenges will go forward, you really need to have what I will call an all-hazards risk assessment. It's not just the acts of terror, it are the actions also of Mother Nature. There is also the growing threat of cyber. Now, where does cyber come into in sports? Well, it's not only the running of the infrastructure, but it also goes to resources and so many other things. Cyber is the central nervous system for all that we do anymore. And so it's important to look to that all hazards risk assessment that goes in there. Private sector leaders are starting to pay far more attention to that larger all hazards perspective because they have to. It's the one thing that they don't consider or they don't forget that they will not be ready for. And all of them are looking to be very much ready for anything that comes their way. That's why there are really 3 Ps that go forward that people need to be, companies are certainly looking at. And those are basically planning, partnering, and preparing. And so on planning, you are starting to see lots of private sector players, again, whether they be team owners or they be sponsors, whatever, playing a very active role in the planning of what goes forward as far as an event, as far as a team, as far as a venue. And you are starting to see more and more of these players, more and more of these companies, and looking at these activities, they are looking towards I will say, not just even it certainly involves brand management, but it also goes to brand protection. Liability is a huge issue for any company that's associated with any enterprise today, and particularly in the United States, we can be, let's just say, a little overly litigious. So companies are looking to mitigate that risk, and they can only do that by being effective planners. Additionally, I will use a case example on how active some of the planning is going from some of the sports franchises in this country. Every major sports league in this country, as well as major sporting venue, now is putting in magnetometers as well as pat-down searches. That isn't meant to sort of reduce, or that is not meant to increase the frustration of urgent fans that want to get their seats and see the game unfold. That is literally to protect the fans, protect the venue, and protect the larger sport of what's going on. So they're being very, very proactive. Now, that's not just for acts of terror, which obviously they're out to mitigate against, but when you have people that have planned for emergencies, you have what I will call a success story that occurred in Fenway and in Boston's Fenway Park a few weeks ago. Tragically, there was a player went to hit the ball. The bat snapped, and a chunk of that bat went flying into the crowd and struck a fan, and they sustained what was at the moment a life-sustaining injury. Because of some of the planning that Fenway Park and its parties had in there, they had people, both private sector individuals that were own and operate the Fenway Park, as well as the public safety individuals, right there on the spot, and they saved that woman's life. That is not a story. No one and no sports enterprise wants to see a fan or a spectator or anybody injured at their facility, but you saw what that good planning had done. Preparing is another piece. I'll use an example. The New York Mets in New York, where they operate, is in proximity to LaGuardia Airport. How they have prepared for their venue is they've been good neighbors with their friends, the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey, as well as the regional public safety individuals, and they have been doing exercises in their venue multiple times a year, not only to mitigate against acts of terror, but whether there be an aircraft accident or there be some other type of weather emergency. They make sure that they are as prepared as they possibly can be, because again, no one can fully know what that risk will be, but if they develop a skill set and relationship beforehand, they're going to be a lot better off when things occur. And that's where even partnership comes in. I think you're seeing more private sector players trying to be very creative in who they reach out to mitigate these risks. It's not just the public safety persons, it's also the communications persons. It comes down to the neighborhoods that go forward. And that's why I think you've seen a number of very, very successful sporting events and venues have popped up, not only in this country, around the world, and that you're getting a full aperture preparedness and risk mitigation that you may not have had before. That's where, again, as Bill had been mentioning, the recipe that may come together in the ingredients. A fuller recipe comes to when you have the right people involved, but also be creative in bringing some of those parties to bear. And so those are a couple of things that we have been seeing and watching with great interest. The other thing I think we found of great interest is the huge reward that goes into a community when you do the planning, preparing, and partnering in the early stages of a structure and a sporting event and venue. You can take a look at whether it be the Verizon Center here in Washington, or you can look at the Barclays Center in Brooklyn, you can look at Camden Yards in Baltimore. There are a lot of sports venue and I would say sports team success stories that make them integral to the community and the economic success that goes on. Sports, yes, is sports, but sports is also a business and can be a very, very effective business for a community as well as a country. When that forward-leaning thought, and I will say full aperture perspective in risk management, et cetera, go forward, you can have the tremendous successes that every country is looking for.
Thanks, Rich. Obviously, we understand the commerce that's involved with sport, and that's a very important ingredient that we have to focus on. Very good points. I wonder if I might turn to Andre and ask you to comment a little bit about, you were very good in outlining all of the activities you have underway and what you plan to do leading up to the Olympic Games. I wonder if you might comment a little bit more on how you might be deciding to reach out to engage the private sector, Brazilian businesses and international businesses to be a part of your planning.
Sim, perfeito. Dentro deste conceito de parceria, e aqui o planejamento, parceria e preparação, citado anteriormente, são pontos fundamentais para nós. E esta parceria não se restringe à parceria somente do setor público, mas também a parceria público-privada, que é fundamental para esse processo. E falo concretamente, todos os investimentos que fizemos, desses em cerca de 500 milhões de dólares, são aquisições, são investimentos feitos e serviços e equipamentos providos pela iniciativa privada. Então isso já é a própria construção de modelos que se pretende do sistema de comando e controle, de tecnologias, o desenvolvimento específico para a ação de segurança de grandes eventos, foi construída dentro do modelo de uma grande parceria com o setor privado. A par disso, nós temos a OSAC também como uma boa parceira. Eu estive em novembro do ano passado aqui em Washington participando de uma reunião da OSAC, onde conversamos com todos os sponsors, com todas as pessoas envolvidas nesse processo de segurança, para identificarmos oportunidades de que haja uma interação ainda maior do setor privado, especificamente nas ações de segurança, na operação de segurança. Em relação aos jogos, e aí nós trazemos uma grande inovação dos jogos do Rio de Janeiro, onde nós teremos uma divisão muito nítida do papel da segurança privada e da segurança pública. Nós, da segurança pública, iremos prover a segurança de todas as instalações de locais de competição e de treinamento. E o setor privado, de segurança privada, fará a segurança dos demais ambientes de não competição e também do seu próprio interesse do comitê organizador, que é uma empresa privada e também uma grande parceira nossa. Então existem várias oportunidades dessa interlocução com o setor privado, na área de capacitação também, é um outro foco importante. E aqui o paramédico também mencionado, dentro das instalações, todo o setor que nós chamamos do bombeiro socorrista, lá, o profissional, também será do setor privado, que participam desta comissão que presido lá no Rio de Janeiro e interagem em toda a construção do plano de segurança.
Thank you, Andre. It's gratifying to hear that you've been able to reach out and engage the private sector already, which might lead me into asking James the next question, which is, since you've been engaged with OSAC on a number of major events, sporting events, can you comment a little bit on sort of the legacy issues or the legacy benefits that OSAC has been able to use over the years from event to event to event?
Sure. Well, OSAC has been on the ground for each major event, which for us is the Olympics, the FIFA World Cup, and the Pan Am Games. We've been on the ground for each one of those since 2004 in Athens, the Summer Olympics. So we do have a long track record of supporting the private sector, learning from what their needs are, and continuing to refine what we do each and every year. I think that last year with the World Cup, that was our biggest success thus far. We had an excellent collaboration of information sharing with the private sector that was operating there. We had good relationships also with the U.S. government presence through the Joint Operations Center. And of course, we worked well with my colleague from the Brazilian Secretariat. And we'd like to continue to develop that relationship and continue to share information. So I think what we've heard today is what OSAC has found, the need to plan and to prepare and to continue to partner with everyone that plays a role. I think one of the things that made us successful in the World Cup last year was that we had been in Brazil for the Confederations Cup the year before. So we saw the operations there. We were working with the private sector, and it was the same group that we were working with. So that certainly bodes well for working in 2016 for the Olympics. So I like the analogy of the recipe. I'd like to use a golf analogy, which again, I'm very glad that golf is returning to the Olympics this year. If I had never played a course before, I'd want to talk to someone that had. And I think that's one of the best things that OSAC can bring to, or any public-private partnership can bring to this formula, is that if you participate through an organization such as OSEC, you're going to have the ability to talk to organizations, companies that have been doing this for some time, maybe already operated in that organization, or excuse me, in that country, and get a little bit of what we call in golf local knowledge.
Good, thanks, James. I'm going to keep going down the line here, so Bill knows he's next on the agenda here. Bill, I know when you first got started in New York, you had to proselytize, so to speak, and go out and convince people that this was going to be a worthwhile effort. I wonder if you might try to share with us a little bit about, when you were strategizing, how do I get people to come and join and be a part of an enterprise that's going to, or an organization that's going to help enterprises prepare for the next disaster?
I think I touched on this a little bit earlier, but let me elaborate. In all of your efforts, you're looking for, if not common goals, at least complementary goals. So business in particular may not have the direct goal that all of you have, perhaps from the public sector, from the governmental sector, but there are complementary goals out there that certainly you want to grow your economy, and part of that economic growth would certainly perhaps involve elements of business profitability. You're concerned about reputational issues, as are they. I think there's a spirit certainly around sport that all of us wish to ally ourselves either governmentally with, or to touch on Rich's point, on a brand perspective. So I think it's finding those, if not common goals, at least those complementary goals, clarifying them, giving a voice to them, but listening to your people. As I mentioned before, you're bringing the ingredients together. If they're the key stakeholders, the opportunity here, perhaps maybe it's part proselytizing, but also it's listening. I think the most effective efforts in this case start with listening to what the key needs, if you will, the opportunities, the potential benefits are for the multilateral stakeholders, and trying to clarify those up front. That why to do it, that why to engage is vital. It may take a little effort down the road. I think it's important to understand too, even in your own end, when you engage the business sector, it's not just about goods and services. They can bring a tremendous amount to your effort that go well beyond just hard goods or services. They can bring expertise in perhaps areas that would benefit your effort, logistics, effective communications, perhaps marketing. All of those can be brought to the table in kind that have definitive benefits as well. They're certainly, in many ways, communication channels, both to their employees and to the wider community, where they already have a marketing communications approach. That can be leveraged to a great extent. They have expertise that also may be specific to particular threats or challenges, or for that matter, finance, that you could bring to the equation. So these are all elements that perhaps might be brought into that stew that we're all cooking. But in order to assure that those elements are tapped, to assure that we have a good stew at the end, there's got to be some level of ongoing understanding as to what the value is. And that value proposition has to be teased out really by engaging your folks first, helping to understand what the potential prospect is, and then really clarifying in their own perspective what their organizational values, the benefits that'll accrue to them, and making sure on the whole that everyone gets something out of the equation. It's a win-win in a positive, transparent perspective. That will give you sustainability over time, as opposed to a one-off, single event perspective where perhaps we all come together because of the goodness of the event, but then it withers away. You want ongoing, sustainable sports development, and that's what I think comes by identifying common goals and complementary goals in that respect.
Very good. Very good. Thanks, Bill. I might go back to Rich now. You intrigued me a little bit as we talked a bit about how companies are looking at sport as a way to enhance their image. Mm-hmm. Is there any particular types of industries that are using sport as a mechanism to enhance it? I mean, I just find that were food industries going to be more interested, or is it just across the board with all organizations?
I would say it's pretty much across the board. Companies want to be associated with winners. Fans want to be associated with winners. And certainly, you know, those particular towns that have very, very successful sports franchises, it is certainly not unusual to find more companies looking to ally themselves, whether that be signage in facilities or that be in broadcasting or whatever that may be. Towns that may not have as much success, there may be fewer advertisers there or sponsors, whatever that might be. But again, every company wants to be associated with a winner. But then if I can go to, in talking a little bit about this, about the larger risk piece that I think companies are looking to be very, very proactive about, particularly the sports franchises. One thing, and I mentioned this earlier, was about liability. We are an overly litigious country here in the United States, and one of the ways that you see a lot of companies, sports franchises, as I would even say sports leagues, they are looking to certainly always protect their spectators, and they do enormous things to certainly safeguard the every spectator that goes there. But they also look to take to utilize advantage of what we call in the United States the CICTE Act, the Support Anti-Terrorism by Fostering Effective Technologies. Everything in the United States seems to have an acronym, particularly if it's created by our government. And this is a program that companies and a number of sports franchises, notably the New York Yankees, the New York Mets, the National Basketball Association, and others, are putting forward strategies and processes and technologies and other things that they're putting into their particular venue to mitigate their risk. But in the event that there is an incident, an act of terror or something like an act of terror would occur at one of their venues, their rate of liability is capped to a particular level. And that is done in part, the CICTE Act comes out of the Department of Homeland Security. It is a multi-stage process. They just don't hand this out. Any company that goes to apply for CICTE Act protections has to prove that they do all of those things. You're seeing companies looking to be very, very proactive. They're always out to look after their spectators, their fans, their teams, their guests, their franchise, et cetera. But they also want to mitigate the risk and exposure that they have. When I looked at the agenda that you have here, you have some stellar talent that's here. But if I could encourage the dialogue as this type of program goes forward, I would encourage you to invite insurers here. Now, who wants an we all recognize insurance can be one of those very, very challenging topics. But when it comes to managing the risk aspect of things, they have phenomenal data, phenomenal insight, and phenomenal insight that I think can help sports and commerce go forward. Yes, they want to minimize the risk, but I will tell you a number of the companies that have gone through a number of the CICTE Act protections have found other intrinsic financial rewards. By doing the planning, preparing, and partnering that they've done, they've been able to increase a number of efficiencies across the board. Efficiencies mean cost savings. Every private sector entity is looking for cost savings. So again, the gumbo, the stew, whatever you want to call that we're cooking here, the more planning, preparing, and partnering and full aperture risk management goes on, the greater the efficiencies that can come about, as well as providing a rewarding experience for both team, fan, and company.
Great. Thank you very much. I think we've heard a little bit about the recipe now, and I think maybe we give everybody a chance to ask a question. We've only got about 5 minutes left, so let's turn it over to all of you out there. Did we generate enough interest to get a question or two?
Muchas gracias. Mi nombre es Zuli Sarabia, soy vicepresidenta de la Confederación Deportiva Autónoma de Guatemala y estoy sumamente interesada interesantísimo todo lo que oí acerca de todos los controles y todo que ustedes han llevado a cabo en los grandes eventos. En mi caso, estamos súper interesados en meter sistemas de seguridad en el Estadio Nacional de Guatemala. Hemos tenido tragedias grandes. De hecho, en algún momento tuvimos 80 muertos en un partido porque se dio violencia dentro del estadio. Queremos implementar sistemas de seguridad donde devuelva la seguridad a todos los habitantes para que asistan a los estadios y que en algún momento puedan disfrutar del deporte, ya que es una de nuestras metas más importantes dentro de nuestro proceso. Entonces sí quisiera poder tener la oportunidad con quién me tendría que abocar para que recibir una asesoría y poder implementar todo esto en mi país. En algún momento, si ustedes me pudieran recomendar, este es uno de los motivos principales por los cuales yo estoy aquí. Muchas gracias.
Well, I think you pose a very interesting question there, and I might turn to Andre first, since he's actively engaged in pulling together the planning for the Olympic Games as they're coming up.
Nós temos uma separação importante em relação ao cotidiano, né, do futebol brasileiro, que é um evento importantíssimo, e a preparação para os grandes eventos que eu tenho a responsabilidade de prover. Mas hoje, com o sucesso que foi a Copa do Mundo, se está levando esse processo, esse modelo de grandes eventos para o dia a dia, não só da segurança pública, quanto especialmente ao futebol. O Brasil tem uma legislação que é o Estatuto do Torcedor, que regulamenta todas as ações e as responsabilidades de cada ente, clube, federação, torcedores e o que cabe a cada um nesse contexto. A partir disso, eu também participo de uma comissão que está regulamentando esta lei para definir as obrigações em detalhes e aí criar uma regra específica. A par disso, a metodologia de trabalho com o controle de acesso de torcedores, com o controle de venda de entradas, com sistemas, hoje mostrei ali na apresentação, todos os estádios brasileiros têm uma unidade de vídeo monitoramento, uma unidade de apoio de segurança. E isso trouxe um salto de qualidade bastante significativo. Então, objetivamente, eu diria que o ponto de partida é uma legislação que permita ao Estado impor regras e cobrar dos entes que atuam, que ganham muito dinheiro com a promoção do futebol, responsabilidades em relação à segurança, segurança privada, segurança pública também. E um segundo passo, regulamentar e dotar todos os estádios de sistemas que tenham condições de prover a segurança com os controles de acesso e de competição como um todo.
Thank you, Andre. Anything else from anyone?
Greg, if I could just add to that,
Yeah, go ahead.
I think to your question, ma'am, I think really that is in large part what I see ICSS really as undertaking, to be this convener, to be perhaps something in the way of a clearinghouse of best practices over time, to perhaps identify some prototypes. And I don't want to speak certainly for Mohammed and his team, but to your point of looking for insights into security and issues in your own country, I think that's the wonderful direction that I see ICSS undertaking, is to be that perhaps that clearinghouse, that coming together over time of identifying what might be prototype approaches, best practices, perhaps some case studies on different successful events. But I think that's all perhaps in the direction, at least as I've understood it the last 2 days, of what this ICSS and this community that has come together to do. And so it is my presumption and my belief that in large part, some of your issues will be addressed going forward through the good efforts of ICSS and the community it's brought together.
I guess the only thing I would add on to that as well is the facility owners and operators. Oftentimes, I mean, we all know every one of our teams compete against each other, but I have seen within my own experience in this country and a few others, there is a very much joint collaboration, joint information sharing when it comes to security operations leaders for various facilities. Every one of them recognizes it could be them that an incident occurs. And they're all looking out for the other to make sure that they can share best practices, share the lessons learned that have occurred from previous events, and try to mitigate those risks. This is one of the few groups that I have seen in the course of a lot of different enterprises that can be very, very proactive and is proactive in that area. I know the respective sports leagues within the United States here, the NFL security managers, the baseball stadium security managers have regular meetings, not only during the season, but an awful lot of planning in the off season so that they can be forward leaning within the coming season to address whatever they need to. And that's why when fans come back year after year, they may see that there's a new way to enter the stadium. There may be new cameras, there may be new procedures for screening for spectators. All of those things happen, but there's a great fraternity amongst those persons. I would encourage you to see if there is some type of collaboration or forum that can bring some of these persons together. I think you'll be surprised the minute you get them all in the room how quickly they work together.
Good, thank you. Well, I've been given the sign that says we need to wrap it up and move on, and we stand between you and the coffee break. So I'd like to end by thanking the panelists, very esteemed group. Comments were right on point. ISS and the OAS are really to be commended, and we'll move forward in addressing all of the questions that you may have. And please come up to us during the coffee break and ask anything you might still have on your mind. Thank you all very much. Thanks for listening.
Debí quedarme tu número y mi teléfono, yo lo voy a guardar.